One of my favorite wackadoos is less, just trying to be as edgy as possible, than yours #or Gurdjieff, lover. But minus Ouspensky, dancer. When I get to the bottom I go back to the top of the slide. The period from Blavatsky's Theosophical Society through the psychedelic explorations of Leary and Lilly produced an extraordinary parade of systematic occultists, each promising comprehensive maps of consciousness and reality. Yet among these figures, many of whom seemed primarily motivated by shocking bourgeois sensibilities, L. Ron Hubbard stands out as surprisingly earnest in his systematic ambitions, despite his fatal inability to accept the kind of brilliant interpreter that transformed Gurdjieff's raw insights into teachable doctrine. The edginess question: shock value versus systematic intent. Compare Hubbard's output to his contemporary occult figures, Crowley's deliberate provocations and Do What Thou Wilt, Kenneth Grant's increasingly baroque Typhonian fantasies, or Austin Osman Spare's artistic shock tactics. Even later figures like Timothy Leary built their reputations partly on épater bourgeois, the thrill of scandalizing conventional society. Hubbard, by contrast, seems genuinely focused on creating workable technology for consciousness change. His early Dianetics writings read less like occult mystification and more like engineering manuals. Where others cultivated mystery and transgression, Hubbard obsessed over reproducible procedures and measurable results. The tragedy is that his paranoid rigidity prevented him from accepting the kind of sophisticated interpreter who could have refined his insights, his own Ouspensky, who might have saved the system from its founder's psychological limitations. The historical context. From Blavatsky to Lilly. Helena Blavatsky established the template, vast cosmological systems derived from hidden sources, promising to revolutionize human understanding. Her theosophical synthesis drew from Eastern philosophy, Western occultism, and emerging scientific concepts, creating an alternative worldview for those dissatisfied with both materialism and conventional religion. This tradition continued through figures like Rudolf Steiner, who broke from theosophy to create anthroposophy, Gurdjieff, with his Fourth Way, and eventually reached the psychedelic researchers like John Lilly and Timothy Leary, who used consciousness-altering substances to explore similar territories that earlier occultists had mapped through other means. Hubbard fits squarely in this lineage, but with crucial differences in approach and temperament. Expanding utilitarianism, the 8 dynamics. Hubbard's reformulation of the greatest good for the greatest number, through his 8 dynamics, represents a genuine philosophical contribution, whatever one thinks of its implementation. Rather than crude utilitarian calculus, he proposed evaluating decisions across 1. Self-preservation, 2. Sexual, familial survival, 3. Group survival, 4. Species survival, 5. All life forms, 6. Physical universe, MEST, 7. Spiritual universe, 8. Supreme being, infinity. This framework attempts to address utilitarian blindness to different scales of value and consequence, a more sophisticated ethical calculus than most occult systems provided. Theta MEST and the science of survival, Hubbard's Hegel. The most philosophically ambitious element of Hubbard's system appears in his Science of Survival and the Theta MEST theory. Here the parallels to Hegel become unmistakable. Hegel's dialectical system describes spirit, Geist, working through historical contradictions to achieve self-consciousness and freedom. Hubbard's Theta MEST dynamic describes life force, Theta, engaged in an ongoing struggle with matter, energy, space, and time, MEST, gradually achieving greater freedom and self-determination through this interaction. Both systems are fundamentally teleological. They describe consciousness evolving toward greater freedom and self-awareness through engagement with limiting conditions. Both see apparent setbacks and entrapment as necessary stages in this development. The science of survival's tone scale, with its detailed mapping of emotional and behavioral states, resembles Hegel's phenomenological descriptions of consciousness working through various forms of self-alienation. The key difference lies in scope. Hegel describes the historical evolution of collective human consciousness, while Hubbard focuses on individual psychological archaeology and advancement. #TR0 and Gurdjieff's essential teaching. Training Routine 0, the practice of sitting without reaction, simply being present with whatever arises, captures virtually everything essential in Gurdjieff's system. Both teachers recognize that ordinary human consciousness operates mechanically, responding to stimuli without genuine choice or awareness. TR0 develops what Gurdjieff called self-remembering, the ability to maintain conscious awareness while engaged with external circumstances. This single exercise, though representing only a tiny fraction of Scientology's technical corpus, arguably contains more practical wisdom than the elaborate cosmologies that both teachers constructed around this central insight. #The Steiner Model. Tech and Admin as Total System. Like Steiner's anthroposophy, Hubbard attempted to provide not just spiritual practices but complete alternative approaches to education, healthcare, agriculture, and social organization. Steiner gave us Waldorf schools, biodynamic farming, anthroposophical medicine, and eurythmy. Hubbard provided study technology, the purification rundown, organizational management principles, and detailed social reform programs. Both men shared the conviction that piecemeal reforms were insufficient, that genuine human advancement required new approaches to every aspect of civilization. The scope was breathtakingly ambitious in both cases, and the practical results remain contentious. Korzybski's failure and the reactive mind. Alfred Korzybski's general semantics failed to achieve its revolutionary aims partly because it operated at the wrong level. His famous A=A=A formulation, the idea that rigid identity statements cause psychological and social problems, was correct but incomplete. Hubbard adopted Korzybski's A=A=A insight but embedded it in a more comprehensive theory. The reactive mind operates through just such false identifications, stored as painful engram recordings. When someone encounters a restimulative environment, the reactive mind computes A=A=A, present circumstances equal past trauma, requiring identical responses. Where Korzybski thought intellectual understanding of semantic principles would liberate people from these patterns, Hubbard recognized that the problematic identifications existed below the level of rational thought. They had to be discharged emotionally before semantic clarity could emerge. This explains why general semantics remained an intellectual curiosity while Dianetics, for all its problems, generated mass enthusiasm. Hubbard and Lacan. Language as the trap. The most sophisticated parallel between Hubbard and Jacques Lacan concerns their shared insight about language as the mechanism of psychological entrapment. For Lacan, language, the symbolic order, structures subjectivity but also alienates us from immediate experience. We become subjects through language but lose touch with the real in the process. Hubbard's formulation is remarkably similar. It is language that gives the reactive engram bank teeth. According to his theory, traumatic experiences become psychologically active only when connected to verbal content. The words recorded during moments of unconsciousness provide the mechanism by which past trauma controls present behavior. Both theorists saw language as simultaneously necessary for human consciousness and the primary source of psychological suffering. This insight shapes their therapeutic approaches. Lacanian analysis works through language to reveal its own contradictions, while auditing uses language to discharge the emotional force that language itself has trapped. Additionally, both practitioners structured therapeutic sessions around the client's process rather than arbitrary time limits, recognizing that psychological breakthrough follows its own rhythm rather than clock time. The Paranoid Tragedy. No Ouspensky. Gurdjieff's raw insights might have remained the province of a small circle of followers without P.D. Ouspensky's systematic mind and literary gifts. Ouspensky took Gurdjieff's often contradictory and deliberately obscure teachings and rendered them into coherent, teachable doctrine. Hubbard desperately needed his own Ouspensky, someone with the intellectual sophistication to refine his insights while remaining loyal to their essential spirit. Instead, his increasing paranoia and authoritarian control drove away potential collaborators who might have elevated his work beyond its founder's psychological limitations. The tragedy of Scientology lies partly here. A system with genuine insights about consciousness and human potential, trapped forever in the psychological patterns of its creator because he could never trust anyone enough to let them improve upon his work. Conclusion. The systematic impulse. What distinguishes figures like Hubbard from mere occult showmen is the genuine systematic impulse, the drive to create comprehensive, workable alternatives to existing approaches to human consciousness and social organization. This places him in the serious company of systematic innovators from Blavatsky through Steiner to Gurdjieff, regardless of what one thinks of their specific formulations. The persistent appeal of such systems suggests something important about human needs that conventional institutions fail to address. Whether the insights embedded in these comprehensive alternatives can be separated from the authoritarian structures that typically develop around them remains an open question, but one worth pursuing for anyone interested in expanding human capability and awareness. The real measure of these wackadoos may be not their claims to final truth, but their willingness to attempt systematic alternatives to the psychological and social limitations that constrain human potential. In this light, Hubbard's earnest engineering approach, however flawed in execution, deserves more serious consideration than the mere provocations of his more obviously edgy contemporaries.